we have our own spots. We like different kinds of music. We do different kinds of things, and we get together. We all get together. We meet in the middle, and that's what Tool is.
The release of Tool's third album proper, Naturalists, on May the 15th, 2001, was surrounded by an unprecedented fever of anticipation and speculation. Why had it taken the band so long to follow up 1996's platinum-selling Enigma, one of the most influential, acclaimed and groundbreaking heavy metal albums of the last decade? Had singer Maynard Keenan's extraordinarily successful sabbatical in the band A Perfect Circle been prompted by internal rifts? Or had it in fact been a cause of dissent within the group? How would the legendarily unstable and experimental Tool sound have changed and evolved over the intervening years? And how would the metal community, and the world at large, react to an album that was rumoured to be their most difficult, obscure and abrasive to date? Prior to its appearance in the shops, Naturalists was shrouded in mystery, with the release date being pushed back by a month and no promo copies available to journalists or radio stations. Up until the last minute, no one even knew what the album was going to be called. Rumours were rife surrounding its inception, but Tool are a band that is no stranger to controversy. Notoriously media unfriendly, the Los Angeles-based quartet rarely give interviews, which of course only adds to their enigmatic allure. Preferring to let the music speak for itself, Tool's main message has always been that the people should think for themselves and not follow what others tell them. All the areas that Tool's songs and imagery refer to, dreams, magic, the occult or paranormal, altered states of consciousness, can be seen as gateways to imagination and self-determination. From the start, the band has spoken out against censorship and state intervention in people's lives, and in favour of personal freedom and individual expression. Given this stance, it would be hypocritical for Tool to set themselves up as role models or figureheads, as somehow more important than anyone else. Anything you read or hear about Tool always has to be taken with a pinch of salt, as from the start the band have delighted in spreading misinformation about themselves. Far from being aloof or arrogant, Tool are in fact trying to encourage people to take them less seriously. They are human, they are fallible, they have a sense of humour, and not everything that issues from their mouths should be taken as the gospel truth. Yet, when it comes down to it, Tool are open, honest, intelligent individuals. Like their friend and mentor, the late comedian Bill Hicks, they loathe hypocrisy, stupidity and prejudice in any form. While unwilling to be used and manipulated by the mainstream media, they communicate directly with their fans via the internet. And in the end, they say everything that needs to be said in their music and their lyrics, which are never as impenetrable as the press would like to suggest. This, then, is why Tool have become so popular. They have refused to compromise either themselves or their fans. They've achieved massive commercial success without playing the game, controlling their own artwork and videos, working at their own pace in their own way. While this has at times infuriated the music business, it has won them a loyal, die-hard following who recognise in Tool a band that treats its audience with respect. And all Tool ask in return is intelligence and patience. Yes, Tool's music is something you have to work at. To the uninitiated, the grinding, claustrophobic riffs, the bleak, howling vocals, the shifting, complex rhythm patterns and unearthly electronic squeals on Tool's records may seem daunting. The obscure Latin titles, occult imagery, heavy lyrical subjects and depth of symbolism may seem off-putting. Yet Tool are a band that reward perseverance. The more you put in, the more you get out. There is a depth, a weight to Tool's music that will ultimately prove more fulfilling and longer lasting than that of many of their more immediate, accessible contemporaries. This is why so many bands try to ape the Tool sound, while failing to grasp the underlying philosophy or its subtle intricacies. This is why the band are wary of bootleggers, why they want their fans to be the first people to hear their new album, presented in the manner that they intended. Tool are respected because they've never sold out. They're loved because they produce some of the most challenging, complex and uncompromising music around today. Because they go deeper than any other group dares to, exploring the darkest psychological recesses of the human psyche. Put simply, they're a band you can trust, yet should never underestimate. They're a way in, and if you're prepared to work, then Tool are there for you, to help you to open your mind.
Like the Swans and like Joni Mitchell, Led Zeppelin are kind of a band that you have to really hear the whole picture. They're not necessarily something that you just kind of throw on while you're vacuuming the rug or having a party. They really are bands you really have to open up, make an effort to listen to the whole picture. Otherwise, don't waste your money.
Maynard James Keenan was born on April 17, 1964, into a Southern Baptist family in Ravenna, Ohio. He had one older sister and lived in a happy, supportive, regular family home, headed by his schoolteacher father. Yet when Maynard reached 10th grade in high school, his family suddenly uprooted themselves and began a series of travels around the United States. By the time he was 18, Maynard had lived in Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Kansas, and Texas. Perhaps it was these unsettling experiences that led the young Keenan to crave order and discipline. For in 1982 he joined the Army, enrolling in the United States military academy known as West Point. Keenan's 2 years at West Point were formative in many ways. He was a member of the cross-country and wrestling teams, the Glee Club, and was night crier. The West Point honor code, I will not lie, cheat or steal or tolerate those who do, became a central motif of Tool's first LP, and indeed the band name itself may well have originated in Keenan's time at the Academy. Tool is still a much-used phrase at West Point, as it must have been during Keenan's time there. Among cadets, the term refers to someone who follows rules and regulations to the letter, simply because they are the rules. They do not think for themselves, and as a result are usually manipulated by others, the officers, into doing their dirty work for them. They exist to serve, without any individual thought or direction, and during wartime would be considered merely cannon fodder. This theory as to the origins of Tool's name is consistent with their recurring demand that people think for themselves rather than following orders. However, Keenan himself has said that the name originated with his bandmates joking around, saying that they were going to take him out back to the tool shed to beat some sense into him. An interest in human psychology, theories of control, government cover-ups and the relationship between the state and the individual were all fed during Keenan's time in the military. The Army also helped him develop a strong moral sensibility, albeit one that was counterpointed by a deep sense of alienation and unease. Keenan's mistrust of authority figures was confirmed, as was his insistence on questioning everything, including your own beliefs and perceptions, never automatically accepting what you're told. He later said that the Army taught him a lot about lowest common denominator behaviour, about how people react when stripped down to their basic human components. By all accounts, it wasn't a pretty sight. Eventually, Maynard Keenan decided to follow up his observations by quitting the military to study art. He attended the Kendall College of Art and Design in Michigan, the best in the area, where his work is remembered as haunting, intense and abstract. While there, he became friends with a future actress Gillian Anderson, now best known for the role of Scully in the sci-fi conspiracy theory TV show The X-Files. He also began expressing himself through music. Keenan had always been a rock fan. At the age of 12, he was obsessed with the cartoonish heavy metal group Kiss, and during the 80s he sang in a couple of bands, one named Texans and the other Children of the Anachronistic Dynasty, or CAD, who released one independent cassette-only album, Fingernails. He wouldn't seriously pursue any musical ambitions, however, until he found himself living in Los Angeles at the beginning of the 1990s, where Keenan found himself a job applying the principles of Feng Shui to, of all things, pet shops. But while Maynard was rearranging furniture in harmony with its surroundings, fate was arranging a meeting of minds that would prove far more auspicious in its consequences. Living below Keenan, in his LA apartment block, was a classically trained session drummer named Danny Kerry. Born on the 10th of May, 1961, in Paola, Kansas, his normal, happy childhood was supposedly interrupted when he saw his father, an insurance company manager, out in the yard with a large sword, conducting some kind of Masonic ritual. This stimulated in Kerry a lifelong interest in the occult, as well as in metaphysics, science and geometry. He began playing drums at the age of 13, including snare drums in his grammar school band, before attending the University of Missouri as a music student, although he quit before graduation to go on the road with a rock group. In 1986, Kerry moved to LA to work as a jobbing drummer, playing with such diverse acts as 70s singer-songwriter Carole King and anarchic punk cabaret troupe Green Jello, whose Three Little Pigs was a UK hit around the turn of the decade. He also drummed with the rock act Pygmy Love Circus, with whom he still performs to this day, and could be seen by night playing in the back room of any number of downtown clubs, often during this period using an electronic drum kit. Kerry's day job was working in a tape duplication house, and it was here that he met guitarist Tom Morello, later of Rage Against the Machine. Morello introduced Kerry to an old high school friend of his from Libertyville, Illinois, who had also recently moved to LA, and who, coincidentally, was already jamming with Kerry's upstairs neighbour. Adam Jones was born on January the 15th, 1965, and had played bass in Tom Morello's high school band, Electric Sheep. A comic book obsessive, Jones had originally studied violin as a child, but soon switched to guitar, as well as playing stand-up bass in the school orchestra. While attending art school, he'd attempted to combine his various interests in music, sculpting, sketching and skateboarding, finding that one activity would often inspire an idea in another field. He eventually drifted towards the special effects industry, and after graduating from the Hollywood Makeup Academy, worked on such films as Ghostbusters 2, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Predator 2, Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. While becoming increasingly disillusioned with the Hollywood blockbuster machine, Jones supposedly came across a book called A Joyful Guide to Lachrymology by one Ronald P. Vincent. Vincent had apparently written the book in 1949 after the death of his wife in a snowplow accident, and in it advocated using your emotional or physical pain to improve your understanding of life, channeling negative energy to positive means. Lachrymology means crying as therapy, as Vincent, who according to legend died a drunken penniless bum in 1988, believed that tears were cleansing agents, purifiers of the soul. This is one of the murkiest areas of Tool mythology, as to this day no one is quite certain whether lachrymology, Vincent or his book ever really existed, or whether the band invented them in their early days to hoodwink gullible journalists. However, if we take the group's word for it, then lachrymology became something of a personal religion for Jones, and later the other members of Tool as well. It was also Vincent's book that inspired him to form a band as an outlet for his darkest feelings and frustrations, making music as a therapeutic vehicle for aggression and the release of emotional pain. After much pestering, he persuaded Keenan, who he'd met through a mutual friend, to come in with him, and convinced Danny Carey to let the duo use his practice space. Carey would occasionally come down to see how the pair were getting on, only to hear how they'd invited some drummer along to jam with them, but they'd turned out to be incompatible, or worse, hadn't turned up at all. Kerry felt sorry for them and agreed to sit in a few times, joining in as they set out to purge their demons. He soon realised that this was more than just another couple of wannabe rock stars. This was something intense, something real. An unmistakable chemistry soon began to develop between the accomplished drummer and the two neophyte musicians. It was alchemy. Mud was slowly turning into gold.
Yeah, well, I mean, we just try not to limit ourselves in any way, like emotionally, and that's what we try to keep in the forefront as we're composing, I guess, is making the songs the best emotional vehicles as possible.
Paul D'Amour was a guitarist from the white trash backwater of Spokane, Washington, who had moved to Los Angeles in order to work in the film industry. The film he was meant to be working on, however, kept being pushed back, and he increasingly found himself hanging around town with nothing to do. At this time, D'Amour thought that he was through with music. But when Danny Carey brought him along to hear the dark, unsettling noise the drummer was creating along with Maynard Keenan and Adam Jones, and was told that they were looking for a bassist, he soon realised that he was wrong. Friends from this period remember Paul D'Amour as being angry all the time, and as such, perfectly suited to playing the intense, aggressive songs that were emerging from Danny Carey's practice room. Joining their sessions, he felt a release that he'd never achieved through playing rock music before. As it was for the others, the band soon became an essential survival mechanism, a way to exercise all the pent-up hatred, anger and frustration generated in their day-to-day lives. As Maynard Keenan would later insist, tool is a verb, not a noun. In other words, the group was about the experience of playing together, not a product to be sold. It was, quite literally, a tool to learn and gain from, at first just for the band members themselves, but later for their audience as well. Tool was officially formed in April 1991. Initially, the band had no intention of competing in the music industry, no ambitions to sign a record deal or pursue careers as musicians. They'd had first-hand experience of the shallowness and hypocrisy of the movie business, and naturally and correctly assumed that the rock business would involve more of the same. They had no desire to get involved. All four already had jobs, and none had drifted to LA in order to make it, unlike the hundreds of identikit glam metal bands that littered Sunset Strip, all posing in their hairspray and tight satin pants, desperate to be the next Guns N' Roses or Motley Crue. Neither did Tool's bleak, primitivist, extremely heavy rock fit in with the Bay Area punk groups, big shorts and flannel-wearing frat boys whose self-consciously dumb music seemed to be geared purely towards keg parties, getting laid, and maintaining a kind of perpetual adolescence. No song could be more than 2.5 minutes long, or feature more than 2.5 chords, and the lyrical subject matter could go no further than girls, getting wasted, and a stereotypical frustration with the system. From the very beginning, Tool wanted to be more than this. In the band's first press release, Maynard explained how when he sees a band, the first thing he looks at is the singer. If he believes in what he's saying, then Maynard will listen to the band. But if they're all jumping around, and the singer's got a half smirk on his face, like he's just there for the beer, then Maynard says, I don't pay attention. If nothing else, Tool is about sincerity. They believed that there was a place for intelligence and experimentation within heavy music, and that the spirit of punk should be about opening doors rather than closing them. At the same time, they were influenced by the progressive bands of the early 70s that punk professed to despise, acts like Led Zeppelin, King Crimson, Peter Gabriel and Pink Floyd. They wanted to write longer songs that went deeper than just surface rage, that explored a more profound sense of alienation and disenchantment than their peers. They wanted to incorporate their interests in ritual magic, the paranormal, the visual arts and human psychology, and to be allowed to develop as musicians and songwriters. Tool was conceived as more than just a band. Instead, it was a whole way of looking at life, a fully integrated creative vision that the four members could maintain while continuing to pursue their day jobs. Tool were as surprised as anyone then by the record company bidding frenzy that erupted following only a handful of local LA shows. While the band were correct in assuming that they wouldn't fit in with either the pay-to-play hairspray scene or the lowest common denominator punk milieu, their early live gigs stood out simply by virtue of being so different, so unexpected. As Kerry, Jones and D'Amour churned up a storm of aggression, anger and hatred, riffing furiously and rhythmically along a single theme, Maynard would stand stock still in the eye of the hurricane, letting the force of the music be channeled through him. Resembling some kind of skinny caveman, his long hair falling about his shoulders, Maynard would sway hypnotically, his eyes either half closed or staring unblinkingly out into his audience. Those same unblinking eyes seemed to be focused directly on their souls, on their society, on the rotten state of humanity in general. His clear, strident, unearthly voice would rise from a threatening mumble to a sudden piercing scream as the band played with raw, naked energy, all of them lost in the power of the music, not putting on a show, almost oblivious of the audience, but concentrating fiercely on what they were doing. The message was clear. Tool was for real. The music was heavy, not for effect, but because it was cathartic. It was deeply felt, and as such was bound to connect with a potentially vast audience who all felt the same way. Tool may not have fitted in LA, but in the wider music market there were bands that they considered their peers. In late 1991, Nirvana had just broken through with Nevermind, playing raw, uncompromising and emotionally expressive punk metal that the media soon termed grunge. While dismissive of the superficialities of the movement, Tool respected bands like Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains and Nine Inch Nails, who had something to say and who were making powerful, extreme music in an environment still dominated by insipid pop and mindless FM radio rock. It was also inspiring to see that these bands were shifting units, and this phenomenon in turn allowed the record companies to see the potential in a band like Tool. The four-piece signed with the BMG-affiliated Zoo Entertainments in November 1991, barely 6 months into their existence, and after only a handful of shows. They may not have intended to go into the music business, but the music business had come to them. Tool were on their way.
But we have done well for ourselves because of our fan base. It's been very underground, lack of advertising and marketing with the band. It's been more of a thought process. It's been more of a, people kind of getting in touch with the music and taking it a lot further than just being the hot pick of the week.
Following a small nationwide club tour in February 1992, Tool released their debut EP, Opiate, the following month. As with all future releases, the artwork was created and coordinated by Adam Jones and was visually uncompromising and disturbing. The Opiate sleeve featured a 6-armed priest and a diorama around the theme of anal sex, and like the Tool logo itself, an intimidating phallic wrench. These images frightened away as many critics and casual listeners as they attracted. In fact, it was initially the visual side of Tool that won them attention from those who'd not seen the band live, particularly the Adam Jones directed video for the song Hush. The only Tool video to directly feature the band members themselves, Hush shows the foursome stark naked, but with gaffer tape placed across their genitalia and mouths. This graphically illustrated the song's anti-censorship message and was an early pointer to the group's frequently misunderstood sense of humour. "I can't say what I want to, even if I'm not serious," ran the lyric. With the Hush video establishing a buzz around the band, the 6 tracks on Opiate provided a powerful introduction to the Tool sound. Danny Carey's dense, tightly structured rhythms underpinned the likes of Wrench and Hush, dominating them with his huge oppressive drum patterns. Damour's bass wove in and out, pounding relentlessly like someone hammering nails into a cross. Over this, Adam Jones unleashed a deluge of raging guitars, while Maynard's anguished screams provided a full-throated, unrestrained release of aggression. His haunting refrain on Part of Me provided a welcome change of pace, a melancholy pause before the unrelenting chaos of the EP's 2 live tracks, Cold and Ugly and Jerk Off. Both were recorded the previous New Year's Eve at a party at Green Jello's loft apartment, where Tool played to a packed house, including assorted LA gang members who were spraying their graffiti tags on the walls, while 150 to 200 more people were locked outside on the street. It's not necessarily the nicest element of Hollywood you get coming to your home when you say there's free beer, Maynard later remembered. People were bumping into them as they played, knocking things over, and the band were beginning to think that recording this shambles was going to be a huge mistake. When this frustration started to show in their performance, however, and the band started slamming back, the intensity, energy and aggression of the moment took over, and in the end, Tool turned in a wired, revelatory performance. Yet even at this early stage, Tool never saw themselves as making music for the mosh pit. People could slam dance to their songs if they wanted to, but they'd much rather they stood and listened. Many people got into Opiate because it was the heaviest, hardest rock they'd heard in years. Yet for Tool, the thrash metalers and nihilistic hardcore kids were missing the point. This band was about more than just kicking ass. Sure, the EP was a savage, purging, full frontal assault on the senses, but many only noticed the violent rage and missed Keenan's cuttingly acerbic lyricism, or were confused by the slower, moodier moments. Many reviewers, while comparing the EP to Jane's Addiction or Soundgarden, described it as schizophrenic, yet Tool were only showing a fraction of their abilities and influences, which at this point ranged from Metallica to Tom Waits and Joni Mitchell, AC/DC to Jan and Dean, Parliament and Dwight Yoakam. The title track on Opiate closed the EP, building from an eerily calm beginning to a thunderous tribal cacophony of drums, guitars and screaming at the end. While Opiate only showed one side of the band, being essentially one long, bleak, nihilistic primal scream, Tool were adamant that they weren't just a heavy metal outfit. It was the beginning of a long struggle to confront and challenge their audience's prejudices. In April 1993, the band played a couple of the strangest shows of their career, with 2 sold-out concerts at Los Angeles' Church of Scientology Celebrity Center. In the plush, new age surroundings of the compound, Maynard Keenan gently bleated, "Bah, bah," at the audience between songs, mostly invited guests who'd come to check out the hot new thing. It was clear that Tool were not going to fit neatly into anyone's pigeonhole. Nobody was in for an easy ride.
It's a kind of a burden because now, after touring on Undertow, we learn, you better make sure you write good songs because you have to play them a lot of times, and that would be just the nightmare to go out on the road and have to play something you didn't believe in,
Following the release of the Opiate EP, Tool toured Europe as the support act for Rage Against the Machine, and then travelled across America opening for the Rollins Band. As more and more people got to see Tool live, so their grassroots support increased. An uncompromising, uncommercial band that were never likely to get much radio play, Tool won their growing and loyal fan base by word of mouth and by dint of their awesome live shows. Having seen that they did have an audience and that there were music fans out there who could connect with them and understand what they were about, Tool went back into the studio to record their first full-length album. Co-produced by Sylvia Massey, Undertow opened up the Tool sound beyond the relatively limited parameters of Opiate, exploring the darkest, most disturbing depths of human nature with a cold, almost surgical precision. The complex, deeply structured songs on Undertow probably lost as many short attention span hardcore fans as it won them appreciative new listeners. Dealing overwhelmingly with themes of power and corruption, Tool's songs would begin in rigorous, disciplined harmony before exploding in all directions, finally coming together again at the close. This was the first evidence of Tool's progressive leanings, as the Metallica and Black Sabbath influences of Opiate became conjoined with the ghosts of King Crimson and Rush, creating a sound that was primal, aggressive, cathartic, yet also intelligent, unpredictable, subtle, and emotionally vulnerable. The LA Times compared Sober's haunting chorus to folk rock troubadour Richard Thompson, while noting that Tool possessed a sense of dexterity and dynamics that set them apart from their grunge and industrial contemporaries. Maynard would whisper and murmur as well as screaming, and displayed a human frailty at odds with metal's usual macho posturing. Keenan's distinctive, unmistakable vocal style was becoming an integral part of the Tool sound, although all 4 members made a unique and invaluable contribution. But it was his strident, almost operatic baritone that captured much of the initial attention, turning as many people off as it won over. Rising from clear melodic tones infused with reason and intelligence to sheer screaming rage, many found Maynard's vocals pompous and overwhelming. They certainly didn't sit comfortably in the background. This was a voice that demanded to be listened to, that had something to say. The lyrical subject matter was shoved in your face, and while Maynard never gave anything away, he left behind disturbing visual images that were hard to forget. Prison Sex, for example, is about a man who was sexually abused as a child, and as a result drifted into crime, ending up in jail. Left there to rot by society, all his pent-up aggression, hatred and self-loathing finds, as the chorus puts it, release in sodomy. Inverting the old biblical proverb, the coda finds Maynard repeating the line, "Do unto others what has been done unto you," as trapped metallic riffs swirl around him. Hate breeds hate. Violence breeds violence. "I've found some kind of temporary sanity," the rapist sings at the end. But it's obvious that no one has won. The abused has simply turned abuser. The victim has passed on the burden of the crime to another. As the crescendo of guitars and drums fades to an eerie silence, the listener is left chilled, haunted by a bleak picture of the destructive cycles of guilt, revenge and cruelty that humanity finds itself trapped in. Naturally, Prison Sex attracted attention and controversy, particularly when released as a single, with a typically disturbing stop-motion animation video from Adam Jones. Keenan was quick to point out that the sentiments of the song were not anti-gay, insisting that homosexuality was a part of human existence that we should accept and then get on with evolving. Jones produced another nightmarish claymation video for the song Sober, depicting an Eraserhead-like tableau featuring an old man desperately searching his decaying industrial apartment for some unknown object. It lent a poignant sense of despair to the song, with its soaring melody and tense, steely bass line, and won the award for Best Hard Rock Clip at the 1993 Billboard Music Video Awards. Elsewhere on Undertow, Henry Rollins guested on Bottom, reading out a spoken-word passage that was his own interpretation of a piece that Keenan had originally written and been performing live. Rollins changed it around to suit his own personality and viewpoint, and read with characteristic intensity. Throughout Undertow, Tool retain their anger and urgency, while allowing their songwriting to become more experimental and adventurous, culminating in the 15.5-minute final song, Disgustipated. This bizarre track combined a twisted sense of humour with nightmarish, disturbing imagery in the manner of a David Lynch film, opening with the sound of a farmer performing a sacrificial ceremony on a bunch of harvested carrots. The tortured cries of the vegetables segue into the chirruping of crickets for a full 7.5 minutes, the sound eventually curdling into a low, horrifying moan. The final part of the song comprises an answering machine message left by a serial killer, describing in gory detail just what he's done to his latest victim. The track, Tool explained, was about seeing things differently. Tool's personal tales of destructive relationships, isolation, self-hatred, abuse and incest were underpinned by equally strange and unsettling music. Adam Jones explained that he used unorthodox tunings and bizarre chords in order to make his playing more original and striking, while Kerry's huge drum sound and the bowel-shifting rumble of Damore's bass lines gave the album new depths and dimensions. Combining power and aggression with grace and sensitivity, the music matched Jones's disturbing, blackly humorous sleeve art. In Undertow's case, his pet pig Mo, shaved and surrounded by menacing-looking forks, and an X-ray suggesting a dildo inserted into somebody's rectum. There was also a naked obese woman seemingly swallowing up a skinny man, and painful-looking images of face clamps, body piercing and acupuncture. Undertow gradually began to sell more and more copies as, over the summer, the band embarked on that year's Lollapalooza festival tour. Such was the unexpected response to the LP and the band's live performances that they were promoted from second stage headliners to the main stage halfway through the tour. By the end of the year, Undertow had gone gold and would eventually achieve platinum status. But things, as ever, were not about to run smoothly. Tool still had further to evolve.
If you want pop hits, go listen to Green Day or, Oasis or something.
By 1994, Tool were bona fide rock stars. They won the 1993 Billboard Music Video Award for Best New Artist and had been the surprise star attraction at that year's Lollapalooza. They had toured around the world and as a result had developed both as musicians and as human beings. Seeing other cultures, other ways of life for the first time had broadened their horizons and changed their perspective. And the new material the band was writing was proving longer, more complex and introspective. Keenan in particular found that the more he played live, singing the band's purging songs of anger and aggression, the less he wanted to write new material in the same vein. Tool's music had always been therapeutic, a release, and it seemed like the therapy was working. The group had no intention of consciously trying to emulate the style that people expected of them, and they vowed that if they ever felt like they were merely going through the motions on a song, then they would stop playing it live, no matter how popular it was. Tool's new material was taking them in a different direction, and there was a feeling in the band camp that they'd maybe lose a lot of their metalhead fan base when the new LP was released. As it turned out, that wasn't all they'd lose. Paul D'Amour announced his decision to quit Tool at the end of a short Australian tour at the beginning of 1995. The band were already midway through writing their second album, and Paul had come to the conclusion that he didn't feel comfortable with the form the new songs were taking. The bassist had always been into the hardcore side of Tool rather than their more progressive leanings, and ultimately it seemed like the band had outgrown him. D'Amour had already been playing with a side project known as the Replicants, an offbeat covers band he formed with Ken Andrews and Greg Edwards, of Tool's sometime touring partners and fellow LA misfit band Failure. Initially intended as light relief, the Replicants released an LP on Zoo in 1995, covering a range of songs in distinctive, sometimes unrecognisable style, including Neil Young's Cinnamon Girl and Gary Newman's Our Friends Electric. Paul then went on to form his own band, Lusk, who would release the Free Mars LP. The split with Tool was, by all accounts, fairly amicable, although it was frustrating for the band as they wanted to get on with finishing their new record as soon as possible. Musicians considered for the bass-playing vacancy included Scott Reeder of Chaos, Frank Kavanagh of Filter and Marco Fox from Pygmy Love Circus. But Tool eventually settled on their first choice, 25-year-old Justin Chancellor from Kent, England. Chancellor had first met Tool in New York in 1992 after their first demo tape somehow found its way to him in the UK. His band, Peach, would later support them on tour in Europe, but by 1995 Peach had broken up, although he was on the verge of forming a new band with their guitarist, a friend since the age of 14. He was torn, but eventually made the decision to fly out to LA and join Tool. The band were overjoyed. As Adam said, Justin was always their first choice because he was a friend, he was reliable, he wrote riffs like Tool, his favourite band was Tool, and, with his head shaved except for two pointy red tufts at the front, he looked like the devil. Justin Chancellor joined Tool in November 1995 and, as expected, fitted right in. The chemistry was now complete, and Tool were on the verge of completing their most astonishing, adventurous record yet.
I like to think that maybe we play to people that have a little longer attention spans or something, maybe just, there's plenty of people playing, the 4-minute songs that are really geared for radio and singles and all that. And I don't know, we never have tried to put any kind of limits on anything we did. If a song wants to be 8-10 minutes long, then we'll go ahead and play that, and still think that it will hold people's interest.
Tool released their sophomore album, Enema, in October 1996. The title was a play on words between anima, in Jungian psychology, the repressed feminine side of the male psyche, and enema, reflecting Tool's twisted, scatological sense of humour, and the record's themes of exploration, purification, and prying open the third eye. In trying to move further away from the limitations of the heavy metal genre, the band approached King Crimson and Peter Gabriel producer David Bottrill, whose experience allowed them to develop longer, more complex song structures, proving that powerful, emotive songs didn't have to follow the traditional verse-chorus-verse format. For many, this would have been a recipe for overindulgence, but even at 78 minutes long, Enigma is a tight, disciplined recording with an overabundance of ideas and textures. Of the 15 tracks, only 9 qualify as songs as such, while the rest are experimental ambient interludes and sketches, or sound collages, linking the album together. Enigma could loosely be said to be that dread beast, the concept album, the concept being unity and universal consciousness. Despite the usual plethora of disturbing images, psychic darkness, and relentless punishing grooves, Tool insist that Enigma is a life-affirming record. In interviews, the band claimed that they wanted to make the point that energy is primary and the illusion of matter is secondary. In other words, that all of us and everything on this planet are made up of the same substance. How does this reflect on the lack of unity in the way that we treat each other, they seem to be saying, and on the fact that we, for some reason, consider ourselves a higher life form than plants and animals? Harsh and unsettling, Enigma presented a bleak metallic soundscape, all dense rhythms, neoclassical passages, poisonous swirls of sound, found voices and electronic squeals. Stinkfist, the opening track, begins quietly, Keenan's filtered vocals echoing over empty spaces, before erupting into a storm of descending power chords and thunderous torrential drumming. Stinkfist is supposedly written about a friend of Danny's, who wholeheartedly embraced life and new experiences. That is, he isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Maynard described the imagery of the song as being like stepping through a portal into a different reality, completely altering your perceptions, all your senses lit up with a new understanding. In the award-winning video for this song, released as a single, Jones's stop-motion animation portrays a race of crazed sand people who live on a diet of undigested nails that poke out of their abdomens. They also suck fat from tubes and wires, which causes huge tumours to grow on their heads, and which they then shed and keep in jars. There is also a race of mutants with visible internal organs and others whose entrails can be plugged into the wall. Eulogy is a fierce, bitter tirade against some would-be rock martyr, possibly the late Kurt Cobain, while the pounding, volatile H leads into the first of the sound collages. Useful Idiot, which is simply the sound of a needle scratching away in a groove. Later, Message to Harry Manbach features a genuine recording taken from Keenan's flatmate's answering machine, a series of threats and menaces delivered in a bizarre accent, alternating between English and Italian, laid over a melancholy piano track. The message could almost be taken as romantic, a love poem, if you didn't understand the words. Hooker with a Penis was inspired by a kid who accused Maynard Keenan and Tool of selling out, of not being what they appeared to be, of faking it. Keenan points out that every band you ever heard has already sold out the moment they sign a record deal. The eerie circus music of Intermission prefigures the tense, doom-laden riff of Jimmy, which is followed by the sinister Die Ehe von Satan, in which a stern German voice speaks over machine-like sounds and frenzied crowd noises. In fact, the voice is Marco Fox from Pygmy Love Circus, reciting a recipe for hash cookies, and the title translates as Satan's Eggs, another instance of Tool messing with your preconceptions. Shadowy, extreme, unorthodox, and decidedly difficult listening, Enigma is also the album where Tool got spiritual, although they did so with a sense of humour. Among the typically nightmarish images on the sleeve, which in this case include rolling eyeballs, the San Andreas Fault, and a man filleting himself, is a painting of comedian Bill Hicks examining a mutant boy with leg braces, subtitled Another Dead Hero. Hicks, who died in 1994 of pancreatic cancer at the age of 32, was a friend and inspiration to the band. The feeling was mutual, as he had introduced them on stage on the last date of the 1993 Lollapalooza tour. Hicks's sharp, cynical comedy was all about challenging hypocrisy and complacency, fueled by anger, bile and frustration. He was also an advocate of the mind-expanding possibilities of psychedelic drugs, and an excerpt from one of his routines can be heard on Enigma's 15-minute final track, Third Eye. This churning, edgy epic makes the point that drugs, too, are a tool. They can open up your mind, but you may not like what you find in there. Danny Carey compared Enigma to childbirth, saying that it may seem brutal and harsh, but there's still a beautiful thing occurring. In interviews, Tool could be found talking about meditation, evolution, ecology, and vibrations of sound and light. Enigma was all about positive change in perspective, but one that initially manifests itself in chaos. Tool was certainly a million miles away from the vacuous superficiality of the New Age movement prevalent in California. And as if to make the point clear, Enigma's title track was a biblical, apocalyptic vision of a great earthquake sending the whole state tumbling into the sea, creating sought-after beachfront property in Arizona. Defiantly uncompromising and uncommercial, the album still entered the Billboard charts at number 2, and the band once more joined the Lollapalooza tour in 1997, this time as headliners. In 1998, Enigma won a Grammy for Best Metal Performance, despite its bass-heavy grooves having as much in common with Joy Division as Black Sabbath. Minds were obviously being gradually prized open, just a crack at first maybe, but it was a start. Tool had proved that you didn't have to underestimate your audience in order to sell records. They were breaking down barriers, but following through was going to prove harder than anticipated.
Rage in particular, they're real politically oriented, and none of us in the band, want to get into a political stance. I think that belongs in a separate area. What we do, we try to equate more to art. I don't think politics really has much room in art.
In September 1997, Zoo Entertainments filed a lawsuit against Tool for making a wrongful attempt to abandon its exclusive recording contract. The company had got wind of the fact that Tool's management had been courting offers from other labels while still under contract with Zoo. Tool then countersued, saying that the company had in fact failed to renew their contract, and so the band were technically free agents. The dispute went to court, and in the meantime, Tool were unable to write or record anything to follow up what had been their most critically and commercially successful album to date. The situation was ridiculous. Tool was Zoo Entertainment's only major selling act, and in spite of their success, the record company was on the verge of financial collapse when Enigma was released in late 1996. Nobody seemed to know what was going on, and when a new president was brought in, he began by firing all the people who had even a semblance of a clue, including the lawyers who dealt with Tool. Nobody at Zoo was aware that the band's contracts were coming up for renewal, and Tool, unhappy with the way things were going, didn't exactly speak up. Previous to this, the band's relationship with their record company had always been good. Although they complained about lack of promotion overseas, they had full creative control over their work, produced their own artwork and videos, and were not obliged to undertake any promotional duties they weren't happy with. They were not required to record obvious hit singles, or indeed anything that would garner radio play. Yet the bottom line was, Zoo Entertainments was falling apart. The company claimed that they had a verbal agreement with the band, which obviously could not be legally binding, but the matter still had to be settled in court, a lengthy and frustrating process. While Tool was grounded, the various band members pursued side projects. Maynard in particular kept busy, portraying Charles Manson in a photo strip comic book and on a one-off TV special, recording with 9 Inch Nails' Trent Reznor as part of the experimental Tapeworm project, and, most significantly, forming a new band, A Perfect Circle. A Perfect Circle began when Keenan heard the songs that Tool's guitar technician, Billy Howardell, had been writing, and grew keen to collaborate. Howardell, who also worked with Guns N' Roses, Smashing Pumpkins and 9 Inch Nails, brought in Guns N' Roses and Vandals drummer Josh Freese, and later guitarist Troy Van Leuven and bassist Paz Lenchantin. The group made their live debut at LA's celebrity-studded Viper Rooms in August 1999, going on to play at the Coachella Arts and Music Festival in the California desert. With new Tool material being so eagerly awaited and long in coming, it was hardly surprising that record companies were desperate to sign A Perfect Circle, particularly as they plied a more melodic, conventional hard rock sound than the uncompromising Tool. A Perfect Circle released Mère des Noms on Virgin in 2000, one of the fastest-selling debut albums of all time. Preceded by the single Judith, the record's title translates as Sea of Names, and each song title is in fact the name of a real, mythological or symbolic person. Influenced by the writings of Joseph Campbell on the origins of myth, Mère des Noms was lighter, less aggressive than Tool, a swirling mix of Led Zeppelin riffing and intricate subtle rhythms. The band supported Nine Inch Nails on tour in April, and as the album took off, spent more and more time on the road. Keenan never had any intention of leaving Tool, but A Perfect Circle was more than just a side project. He saw the two bands as coexisting, as different conversations with different people. A Perfect Circle would not end when Tool regrouped, nor vice versa. By this time, the rest of Tool were back in the studio, and Danny Carey expressed some annoyance that Maynard's other project was holding up the recording of the follow-up to Enigma. Tool had won their court case with Zoo, but eventually ended up re-signing with them. The label was sold to new owners who changed the company's name to Volcano, threw almost everybody else off, and offered Tool a very lucrative new contract. As Volcano already owned the rights to their back catalogue and was to all intents and purposes a brand new concern, they seemed the obvious choice. In fact, Tool's new deal represented a multi-million joint venture between the band and Volcano, in which Tool's records would be released on their own mini-label, Dissectional. Tool had more control than ever. They were ready to begin again.
We don't print our lyrics because we want people to really sit closer to the speaker and try and hear what Maynard's saying versus what's going on in the music.
In December 2000, a new Tool release arrived in the shops. Saliva was not the long-awaited follow-up to Enigma, but what it was a chance for the band and their fans to look back on a decade of activity and close one chapter before opening a new one. Saliva was a box set consisting of a CD, a booklet, and either a video or a DVD featuring all four of Tool's Adam Jones-directed promotional videos to date for Sober, Prison Sex, Stinkfist, and Enigma. Despite critical acclaim and garnering numerous awards, the videos had never been commercially available before, and because of their graphic content had rarely been shown on TV. Fans would have to stay up till midnight to catch a glimpse of them on MTV, usually edited and sandwiched in between typically airbrushed pap. The clips all deserved better and benefited from repeated viewings, yielding up layers of ideas and imagery that could easily be missed the first time around. The Saliva CD, meanwhile, consisted of 5 live tracks and 3 unreleased studio recordings. Of the latter group, the highlight was Tool's version of Led Zeppelin's No Quarter, originally recorded for a Led Zepp tribute album, but rejected for being too long. Of the live tracks, Third Eye opens with a sampled voice booming, "Think for yourself, question authority," while Push It expands in an entirely different direction from the version on Enigma, evolving into an echoing, psychedelic dub metal epic, complete with tabla break before gradually building to a demonic crescendo. There's also a version of You Lied, originally recorded by Justin Chancellor's old band Peach, and a previously unheard instrumental, Macabre. Saliva was a tying up of loose ends, a way for Tool to clear out the stockroom and to thank the fans that had waited so long for new material. It was a document of how far they'd come, and a chance to see their groundbreaking video work in its entirety. Briefly, Tool allowed themselves the luxury of looking back. But the best was yet to come.
if it's music, if it's taking a walk, if it's doing drugs, if it's having sex or whatever, as long, reading a book, whatever. As long as my mind is open and I'm expanding my consciousness and I'm aware of my surroundings and I don't take them for granted. I mean, that's what it's about. And I think most people don't want to think about that or don't think about that.
The anticipation surrounding the release of Tool's third album proper was immense. Since the release of Enigma in 1996, the musical landscape had changed dramatically. Bands like Korn and the Deftones had sold millions of records to young, white, disaffected suburban middle-class Americans, storming through the doors that Tool had opened. Inevitably, these bands could not match the level of intelligence and experimentation in Tool's music, peddling instead a superficial, watered-down approximation of Tool's tense, industrial grooves, replacing genuine anger with inward-looking angst and tantrum-throwing. Nevertheless, the fact that these bands existed, as well as the success of A Perfect Circle, showed that Tool's extended leave of absence had left a huge gap in the marketplace. Towards the end of 2000, rumours started to appear in the press and on the internet concerning Tool's new album. It was being recorded using esoteric magical rituals. It was sung in some ancient, obscure language purported to have been spoken by angels. It was going to be obscure, impenetrable, the heaviest record ever made, so heavy it didn't even have a title. The band themselves delighted in this contradictory barrage of misinformation, allowing assorted spurious song titles and album names to leak out. Systema Encephalae seemed the most likely for a while, until finally Tool put the record straight. It would be called Naturalists and would be released after some delays on May the 15th, 2001. Naturalists didn't disappoint. Recorded once again with David Bottrill, it clocked in at 79 minutes, a dense, demanding, soaring epic. Kerry's drumming sounds huger and more exhilarating than ever, while Maynard's vocals seem to have been influenced by his more melodic work with A Perfect Circle. Adam Jones layers complex, serpentine riffs and coruscating walls of noise over Justin Chancellor's subterranean bass. As ever, there are intricate textures and arrangements, dynamic shifts in tempo and volume, waves of industrial percussion and plenty of surging, raw emotion. Songs often begin with quiet, hypnotic arrangements that suddenly explode with furious intensity, and the album itself seems to build to an aggressive peak before descending into the brooding miasma of the second half. The opening track, The Grudge, begins with a furious barrage of tribal drumming and staccato riffs, before expanding into sublime psychedelic space. The trick is repeated on the single Schism, an attack on the senses that becomes haunting, cutting deep into the soul. The crushing, bass-driven Parabola is typical of the album, building towards a mighty anthemic chorus that then dissolves into a wash of eerie sound, out of which Jones delivers some of his most powerful, straight-ahead guitar playing to date. Once again, tracks are linked by experimental sound collages, such as the reverb-drenched guitar picking of Eon Blue Apocalypse and the Eastern chanting of Mantra. The final three tracks, Disposition, Reflection and Triad, comprise a 22-minute overture climaxing in a wall of ugly, distorted noise, thunderous drums and electronic screeching. With Naturalists, Tool once again proved that there is more to them than just rage and volume. Peering unflinchingly into the dark abyss of human civilization, they nevertheless come back from the brink bearing hope for a better world. Tool are not optimists, nor are they pessimists. They are realists. They know that there is aggression and violence inside all of us, which needs to find a release before we can evolve to the next stage. Tool are a way through. As Maynard Keenan sings on Parabola, I know the pieces fit. Tool can help you put them together.